Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today our guest is Raffi Ourlian. Raffi is the current chairman of the Detroit ARF and Armenian Community Center of Detroit. He is a CPA focusing on tax consulting projects. He has been an active member in the Metro Detroit Armenian community, serving many different roles, such as former Board of Trustee member and many different committees, including the Armenian Genocide Recognition Committee. Welcome, Raffi.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So what was the Armenian Genocide?
The Armenian Genocide was an extermination of the Armenian people in 1915 by the Ottoman Turkish government. It started on April 24, 1915, when the Ottoman Turks rounded up the Armenian intellects, clergy, leaders in the Armenian communities, and they massacred them, which then followed with death marches of women and children. Men were forced into armies, work camps. So it was the first genocide of the century in 1915. It was the blueprint done by the Turks that followed by other genocides, such as the Jewish Holocaust and other genocides. It was really the blueprint done by the Turks on the Armenian people. And the Armenians lost approximately 1.5 million people in that time frame.
Well, I mean, I've heard stories, and people have told me, many people have said, I mean, the Armenian people were almost exterminated. I mean, ceased to exist. That's how many people were killed.
Yeah, and that's correct. I think it was such a devastating blow to lose 1.5 million people of a small population. We weren't tens of millions of people, so it was, anytime there's a crime like that, the government should stop it, right? But much less to such a small group, a minority in that area, a Christian minority. It was a devastating event for our people because so many of the Armenians wound up in different countries, which we refer to as the diaspora, whether that was in Syria, Lebanon, Greece, Cyprus, Australia, Europe, United States, Canada. So it was starting all over again for these people and connecting to their culture and heritage and continuing to press Turkey for recognition of the crime that they committed.
Mm-hmm. Now, in addition to the Armenians, they also committed genocide. I mean, we're kind of ethnic cleansing of all Christians, the Greeks, the Syrians, that resided in Turkey.
Yeah, if you look at that number is probably close to 3 million. A lot of Greeks, a lot of Syrians, a lot of Christian people were massacred in that time frame, right up into the 1920s, where they actually even burned a city where so many people.
They burned Smyrna.
And video exists of a city being burned, and it's mind-boggling that something like that could have happened, and the perpetrators never take responsibility for it. And you see the women and children jumping into the water to try to save themselves, and it was just devastating.
Mm-hmm. And part of this genocide, a lot of beheadings, right?
Oh yeah, it was a gruesome genocide, beheadings, photos exist of it, hangings, rape of women. It was just a barbaric crime against a Christian minority.
Mm-hmm. Now, why did it happen?
I think it was on the eve of World War I. I think that the Ottoman Turkish leaders were under tremendous pressure with what was happening around them. but I think they also viewed the Armenians as successful people. I think that they were envious of Armenian people, and I think the leadership said, the Armenian people are a threat to us because we don't know what they're going to do in the next 12, 24 months. Are they going to align themselves with another country related to World War I? What are they going to do? They said, well, let's just get rid of them. Let's just end this issue. Let's get rid of all Armenians, all Christians from our lands, and make this, a Turkish country. And obviously, at that time, they had plans of expanding their borders to a bigger Turkey or Ottoman Turkish government.
Mm-hmm. Now, Turkey entered World War I on the side of the Germans.
Correct.
Okay. Now, to this day, Turkey still denies the genocide. Why do you think they still deny that?
Well, they deny it. They've denied it for many years, ever since it's happened. And it's because of, number one, reparations, restitution. They're much like the Germans in the Jewish Holocaust. They had to make the Jewish people whole. And Turkey wants to avoid making the Armenian people whole, the people that were the survivors, the descendants of those people that survived and started all over again. So they don't want to do it from financial reasons. They don't want to give up land to the Armenian people that is rightfully theirs. And they also have this thing of Turkishism where any recognition of it would be insulting their people. And I know we'll talk about it in a few minutes. It's very similar to what happened in Washington, D.C. They thought that peaceful protesting was insulting the Turkishism, and they acted on that. But those are the primary reasons, I think primarily being financial and the second being the land. I mean, they want to avoid it at all costs, and they deny it. And it's ironic that when they were planning for the genocide, when they were executing the genocide, Nazi soldiers were actually on the ground in Turkey. And the connection has been made that the Nazis learned from the Turkish government on how to deal with minorities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What's the official position of the U.S. government on this genocide?
The U.S. government does not recognize it, even though 46, 47 states have adopted resolutions. The U.S. government knows what happened. They know the truth. Obviously, we had an ambassador to the Ottoman Turkish government, Henry Morgenthau, a very well respected ambassador. And the ambassador's telegrams, notes to the U.S. government clearly indicate genocide. Those are public. There is absolutely no doubt that it's happened. However, the U.S. State Department has very close ties to the Turkish government. We have bases in Turkey. We depend on Turkey in that region. So Turkey imposes a per se gag order that the U.S. government cannot officially recognize it. U.S. presidents dance around it on April 24th. Prior to being in office, they all say we will recognize it in the office, but once they get to the White House, the State Department intervenes and says, we're under pressure from the Turkish government and we can't recognize it.
Okay. Now, the genocide took place, as you said, in 1915, so that's over 100 years ago. Why is this genocide so important?
It's important from the perspective that never again should any group, any ethnic group ever go through a genocide. It should never happen again. And if we can't look history in the eyes and deal with this and acknowledge that this has happened, then how are we ever going to prevent it? It's happening right now in Iraq to the Chaldean Christians. It's happening in Syria. The Christian groups are being extinguished from the Middle East. And this, as I said earlier, this was the blueprint on how to do it, done by the Ottoman Turkish government. We have to stop it. No group should ever go through that, and, whether it be Armenians, Chaldeans, Greeks, or anybody else should ever go through that. And the way we stop it is through education, recognition, and justice for those people that have been through it.
Okay. Do you believe Turkey will admit to this genocide one day?
I believe they will. I think that right now the Armenian people are winning. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on Turkey year after year, even though they tried their best to cover it up. They know what's happened. Their archives have been concealed or destroyed, and usually when something like that happens, there's something to hide. Innocent countries just don't go destroy or hide their archives, and that's happened. And I think that one day they will. I think that they have to face the truth. They know what's happened. All of them know. I mean, even their President Erdogan 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, said 100. Our people that were opposed to us 100 years ago were thrown into the water. They know themselves. They just have this policy that we're going to deny, and we're going to avoid being brought to justice.
Now, one of the most infamous death camps was Deir ez-Zor in Syria. And in 1990, I believe there was a church and memorial built there.
Yes.
But then in 2014, ISIS came along and destroyed that.
Yeah, that is accurate. The survivors through the death march wound up in Deir ez-Zor, and then from there they went to Aleppo, Syria, and then to Lebanon and all over the diaspora. But in Deir ez-Zor there was a memorial and a church, an Armenian church, Christian church, built that preserved some of the identities of those people that were involved in the death march, the people that didn't make it, and a tribute to the genocide. And as you said, that was one of the first things that ISIS, when Syria was falling, the outparts of Syria, ISIS gained control of Deir ez-Zor, and they destroyed the church. There was absolutely nothing left. Just to think that was the memorial of the people that were slaughtered. And here comes ISIS, and they just desecrated, and nothing left of Deir ez-Zor. It's just it's a war zone.
Okay. Can you give us an update on the Genocide Education Committee in Michigan that was recently passed in 2016?
Yes, there's a committee, and they've done an outstanding job along with the Metro Detroit community. They worked together to pass a resolution that the governor signed that in Michigan public schools, genocide education, not just Armenian, all Jewish, all people that have gone through genocide, that it would be taught, mandated in Michigan public schools. So that was passed. That the committee's hard at work on building the curriculum for that and working with the teachers. So that was a big coup, not just for the Armenians, but for all people, that in Michigan public schools, our kids are going to learn about these crimes that have been committed against people. And it's part of education so that nobody ever has to go through this again. And I think that this is the right step. To our surprise, well, not so much surprise, that when we were going through this, that the Turkish consulates were opposed to this, and they did come in and try to build an argument, but there's really not much you can build. I mean, there's no facts on their side. They themselves know what's happened.
Okay. Now, this past April 24th was the 102nd commemoration of, I believe it's called Red Sunday. Is that?
I haven't heard that term.
Okay. Well, anyways,
Yeah.
There was a commemoration. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Event?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time, every year in April, right around April 24th, that's the date that we try to land closest to. We have a commemoration program. And there are multiple committees in Metro Detroit. You have the church group that works on honoring those individuals, the 1.5 million people that were massacred. And in 2 years ago, during the 100th, both church leaders, the Catholicoses of Etchmiadzin and Antillas, made the 1.5 million saints. So that service happens on April 24th. However, the other committee or committees also work on the non-religious component, right? The religion components, Armenians are the first Christian state in the world. Religion is near and dear to our hearts. It's very important to us. But that alone itself isn't going to get the attention and get activism going. So the activism part of the community is very important on getting education bills passed, resolutions, commemorations done. So this year we had our event on April 29th in the Berkeley High School. We had two dynamic speakers. Garo Paylan, who's part of the Turkish parliament, was our guest speaker, along with Fethiye Çetin. And Fethiye Çetin is also a dynamic speaker. She, through her early childhood, adult life, she was raised as a Turkish woman in Turkey, and she highly educated. And one day on her grandmother's deathbed, her grandmother revealed to her that we were not really Turkish, we were Armenians, and we were forced to assimilate into the Turkish country, and my real name is such and such. And from that day on, Fethiye Çetin researched this, got to know the Armenian people, even wrote a book, several books, several pieces. So having her back here in Detroit was really a nice event. Garo Paylan, as I said, is a member of parliament in Turkey, outspoken. There are many YouTube clips of him saying, you know, this is genocide. You can call it whatever you want, but this is genocide. And you could see the other members of parliament pushing him, shoving him. And it was a great event. We had nearly 700 people attend the event. It went off well. We had our youth dance group, the Hamaskain dance group, also participate. I think this is a way that to get the youth connected to what's happening, get them part of the event. So it was a very successful event, and it went really well. We're also planning our book and author event. We annually have a book and author trying to highlight genocide, not necessarily. Last year we brought in someone that also highlighted Alzheimer's disease, an Armenian lady that highlighted based on her mother's story. And our committee, I'm standing on the stage in front of the podium, but it's really our committee that drives these things, and we really work well together.
Okay. Now, Garo, he's Armenian, right?
Yes.
Which is, I mean, he's the first member of parliament in quite some time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I happened to attend that event, and, you know, his words of saying, while it's important to recognize the Armenian genocide, maybe equally or more important is to help those who have been imprisoned recently in Turkey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. I think what we've seen over the last several years is under the Erdogan's leadership in Turkey, journalists have been jailed, politicians have been jailed. Anybody that opposes the government has been hauled off into jail, and it's a pretty sad events that have happened in Turkey, that it's almost like deja vu, right? This is like back to 1914, where anybody that opposes or isn't with the Turkish government is going to be hauled off. And that's happened, and unfortunately, a lot of countries haven't put pressure on Turkey. They haven't covered it as much as they should, but there are thousands of people in Turkish jails right now for no reason, other than just that they, in the democratic values that they want to preserve, peaceful protests or not agreeing with the government, you're in jail.
Okay. And that kind of leads into, we touched on it earlier when the president of Turkey, President Erdogan, was here visiting with our president not too long ago. There was a peaceful demonstration, and these protesters were attacked.
Yeah, correct.
Now, some people say these were even members of the Turkish delegation. Do you think that was true? I mean, they attacked these protesters with pretty brute force. I mean, it was...
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think a little bit of background on it. The Turkish president was going to visit President Trump, and there was a peaceful demonstration happening, all within the laws of democracy and supported in the founding fathers of this country, the right to assemble. And it wasn't just Armenians, it was many different groups that have been oppressed by Turkey. And they were in the park across the street behind the police line. And just a normal protest. And when President Erdogan arrived, through the cameras of Voice of America, you can see that his vehicle pulls up, his security entourage opens the door, they have a conversation, and the lead security official looks up and signals to the other security detail, go ahead, attack. And you'll see them storm across the police line. We had from the ANC, the Armenian National Committee of America, Aram Hamparian was there, part of the protest, and he had a camera, and you'll see through the video that here come 10, 12 Turkish security officers, and they are beating men, women, anybody that was part of anybody they can get their hands on. They were bloodied. People were unconscious. And this happened in Washington, D.C. This was exported from Turkey right into Washington, D.C. This is how the Turkish government deals with protesters.
I mean, I urge people to go online and Google it to see the brutality. I mean, it was just, to think that would happen here in America to a peaceful protest just turns my stomach.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Now, before, you mentioned kind of the Armenian Genocide being the blueprint for other genocides, including the Holocaust. I just want to read this one quote by Adolf Hitler speaking about his plan for Poland, who stated, "Only thus shall we gain the living space which we need," who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians. I mean, for Adolf Hitler to be, looking at the tragedy that happened in Armenia and kind of using that as a blueprint, it was it's terrible.
No, I agree, and it's, the irony of it is that the Nazi soldiers were on the ground and they saw how the young Turks dealt with the minorities. They were there, they learned, they observed, and they took it back. And they took it back to Germany. And this is how they dealt with their problem, the Jewish people. And it was something that was brought over from Turkey. And it's a sad chapter for all ethnic groups that something like this could happen, but Turkey was the architect of it.
Okay. Now, are you familiar with Operation Nemesis?
Yes.
Okay, would you like to tell us about that?
Operation Nemesis was a way that, much like the Jewish people wanted to bring to justice the people that were the perpetrators of their crime, and so much the Armenian people did as well. There were many of the young Turks, the leadership, were let out. I mean, they escaped justice. They took up lives elsewhere, and it was a way of the Armenian people extracting justice on them, bringing them to justice. So that's what that was. I think Talat Pasha, the key person of the genocide, one of the young Turks, was the primary person that orchestrated the genocide. He was brought to justice, as well as others. But I think, to this day, what the Armenian people would want more than anything would be the formal recognition by Turkey, as well as bringing reparations and justice to Turkey.
Okay. Now, several of the Pashas escaped to Germany, and they were granted asylum there.
Correct.
And one of them was gunned down on the streets of Berlin in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. There was a trial, and I believe it took a German jury a little over an hour to acquit him, because he pleaded temporary insanity because of all the brutality and killings that he saw.
That's correct. Sohaman Tilirian, and as you said, it was a slam dunk. I think that the courts, the jury, saw all the things that this person saw in their lives. Mothers raped, executed in front of their eyes, and they said, this man was temporarily insane when it happened, and how could we ever say he was guilty? And it was a not guilty verdict, and one that was rightfully so.
Okay. We're about out of time. I just want to mention there's a great movie out called The Promise. I urge people to see it, because the backdrop is the Armenian Genocide. But with that, we're going to have to wrap it up. So I want to thank you so much, Raffi.
Thank you.